Hello, everyone. Welcome to United Way Oxford's Community United Conversation series. And this evening, we're going to be talking about understanding homelessness in Oxford County. My name is Kelly Gilson, and I am the Executive Director with United Way Oxford. And I am so thrilled to have you joining us this evening. And I know that people are just coming in, so we're going to just kind of slowly stall for a moment or two as as people in the audience and in the community get connected in. We were really excited. We've been doing these Community United Conversation series now for over a year. And tonight's topic actually has the highest response rate of any session that we have held so far. So I think that is really telling that people in our community want to know more and they want to understand, I think, the truth and the reality. So thank you very much for joining us. And as we get started, we certainly have a very busy agenda, but I would actually like to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. And so I will begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Indigenous peoples who have been the stewards of this place. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Ananashpik, Lenape, and the Haudenosaunee. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic and current connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples that have made and are making in both shaping and strengthening the community, in particular, our community here in Oxford County, our province, and our country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the current contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country, and in memory of the deceased children and survivors of the Indian residential schools. So thank you for giving a moment to think and reflect on that. And now I'm going to just give you a little bit of a sort of background housekeeping, and then we'll get started with our panelists. So first and foremost, for those of you that are familiar with United Way Oxford, we thank you for knowing and recognizing and partnering often in the work that we do. For those that aren't familiar, United Way Oxford is a charity organization whose focus is 100% local. That's 100% Oxford County. All the money we raise here stays here, goes to support programs and services that help individuals and families right here in our community. And our investment decisions are made by local people as well, who know the community, who care about the community, and know that they can help change lives. Because that's what we do. We want to work to change and improve conditions so people can have stable, healthy lives, they can have better futures, and they have the immediate needs supports that they deserve and require. So in addition to fundraising, which most people know United Way for, United Way has a lot of other priority areas. We obviously invest the money, and that is certainly a major priority for us. And you'll hear probably a little bit about some of that this evening as we talk about programs and services a bit. But we also take to heart our role as an organization that can bring people together, that can mobilize action, that can be a catalyst for change. We do research. We believe in education and support of organizations and building capacity of volunteers. And we think of this Community United Conversation series is very much a building capacity, building community capacity. We tackle some really difficult, what we call unignorable issues. We bring together experts and local experts with a lens on how those issues are impacting our citizens and our neighbors and family and friends. And we want to discuss and better understand and unpack some of these things. And so tonight it is really about understanding homelessness here in Oxford County. And I want to also just mention that this Zoom world is fantastic, but it's far from perfect. So if there's a dog barking or a baby crying or anything happening, please bear with us. This is sort of the world we currently are in. And you will have an opportunity. You are all muted. You are all sort of off camera, if you will, but you will have the opportunity to use the chat box. If you have questions, please type them in there. We will get to your questions maybe through the presentation or certainly towards the end. And we will be sharing resources that way as well. So please use that if you have anything that you would like to share or to ask. And I thank you for joining us. I really appreciate the fact that this is of such importance to the community and that you're here. So many of you are here. It will be recorded and on our website. And so we know that after the initial evening, the video is shared quite frequently in workplaces and with others across our community. And Rogers Cable also picks it up and shares it. And we're thrilled that they do that to help spread the word about, again, these unignorable social issues. So thank you for attending, everyone. And thank you for our panelists. And so I am going to just give you a couple of words of the rules, and then we're going to meet our panelists this evening. So although we're going to be talking about homelessness and well-being in general, I want to really reinforce, we are not talking about individuals, and we're not going to talk about specifics that might identify someone. If and when there are personal stories shared, they are shared with permission. We won't be using names or identifying factors, but they are shared with permission. So I think you should know that. And I think that's really the big rule for the evening, I guess. So beyond that, I would now like to get started. Our timing is perfect. Yesterday was National Housing Day, so we couldn't really have a better time to jump into this topic and talk about homelessness. And so I'm going to ask our panelists to please introduce themselves, a little bit about themselves and a little bit about the organization that they represent. And then we'll move on. So I'm going to start with Lisa. And Lisa is an improvement advisor with Built for Zero Canada. And so Lisa, I'm going to start and ask you to introduce yourself, and then we'll go around the Zoom circle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kelly. My name is Lisa Bell. So I am an improvement advisor with Built for Zero, and that is not a very telling title. So essentially what I do is work with communities across Canada who are dedicated to ending either chronic or veteran homelessness. And chronic homelessness refers to long-term homelessness. And what we do is try and test out different strategies and approaches that work towards the goal of ending homelessness. And Built for Zero is part of a larger organization known as the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, which has several initiatives underneath it, including a national conference every year, where we bring together frontline staff, people with lived and living experiences of homelessness, service providers, to talk about anything innovative and what's working to really best serve those in the community who do not have a place to call home.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And so I'm going to follow my little screen circle. So I will go to Stephanie next. Stephanie Ellens-Clark is with the Social Planning Council, Oxford.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me tonight. So Kelly said who I am, Steph. Our organization, Social Planning Council Oxford, really works to shine a light on the realities of poverty and marginalization in our community to ultimately shift understanding. So that's why we're happy to be here today, but also inspire collaborative action for positive change. And it's really because we believe down to the core, our organization, that every resident in Oxford County deserves and should experience well-being and a sense of belonging. So I come to this conversation as someone who is very system-minded, and my brain is just wired that way. So I used to work actually in a emergency shelter, and I struggled because I would meet with people and just could see all this sort of system and policy issues. So I think that's, I'm hoping, the lens I can bring today, and I'm excited to hear from others. So thank you.
Okay, and so next I would ask Amanda Cook from the Oxford County Community Health Center to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Cook. I'm an outreach worker at Oxford County Community Health Center, like Kelly said. I'm also the lead for the mobile health outreach bus, which United Way was very generous in helping us launch just a little over a year ago now. So the bus goes out every Monday in Woodstock, and then Wednesday in Tillsonburg, and Thursday in Ingersoll. We have primary care on it, we have mental health on it, we have human services on it, we have CMHA on it, we have everybody that tries to come out as partners and support our clients right where they're at. So we're street level. What do you need right here, right now? What can we help with? And we get them connected with as many services as we can right then and there. So that's really important to us.
It's really important to the community, absolutely. And last but definitely not least, Shanta Whitman with Oxford County, the Human Services Department of Oxford County.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me tonight. Yes, I am one of the supervisors of affordable housing with the County of Oxford Human Services. And my position's a little bit unique because I'm sort of focused on the homelessness portfolio and working collaboratively with all the faces actually that you see here right now tonight. So with Human Services, our department of the county administers the Ontario Works financial program, childcare subsidy, and a rent geared income housing, along with all of the human services that are offered to all Oxford County residents, with our motto being everyone is eligible for service. So not necessarily may you come to us under one of those umbrellas, but we are definitely a great access point to help folks in our community.
Excellent. So thank you all, our incredibly knowledgeable and deeply connected panelists, for joining us today. And so we're going to start with Lisa, actually, who's going to give a little bit of a presentation from a higher level perspective. And then when she's finished, we are going to drill right down into an Oxford lens and talk about programs and services, talk about some realities and dispel some myths, address some of the things that we know just are not to be true. And I think really open all of our eyes to understanding at a higher level the vastness of this topic. And so to start, Lisa, before we get into that specific kind of Oxford conversation point, could you share with us a little bit about what Built for Zero does and what you are doing across the country? And I know you're helping here in Oxford as well, and what you're seeing maybe across the country as well, because we know that this is not just an Oxford, sadly, this is not just an Oxford phenomena.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to share my screen because I did. Oh, if the other Amanda could help me be able to share it, I'm just not allowed to share my screen from my end. But while she's working on that, I'll just say that what we do with communities across Canada really varies. So there is no magic bullet, unfortunately, to end homelessness. There is no one size fits all approach to end homelessness. And so what we try to do is really listen to what is happening on the ground in terms of homelessness and be able to tailor responses directly to what we're seeing in communities. Because when we talk about homelessness, it's a constantly changing problem. right? People cycle in and out of homelessness. One day, somebody can be experiencing homelessness. The next day, we might not know where to find them. The next week, they might be back in our care. A couple weeks later, you might hear that they're sleeping in their car. And so what we really need to do is be able to have regular data and information on what homelessness looks like in communities to be then able to tailor responses directly to what we're seeing. And I think I should be good to share my screen now, so just bear with me.
I think you can, and we can make sure that your slide deck is available as well afterwards.
Awesome. So are you seeing my screen?
We are.
I've definitely shared the wrong screen before, so thank you for telling me that it's the right one. Yeah, I'll dig right into it. So I did already mention that the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, the organization where Built for Zero is nestled, holds a conference every year. So you can stay up to date on what that conference looks like if you go to conference.caeh.ca. But we also have several other ways that anyone can get involved in the pursuit of ending homelessness. So we do have several allied networks. And what the allied networks do are they dig into a specific piece of homelessness. They create their own plans and strategies and goals with that specific piece of homelessness. So for example, we have a women's homelessness network that anyone can join. And what they do is they get together to talk about different approaches and solutions specific to women's homelessness. We also have a right to housing network that talks about how to make the right to housing something that's tangible and accessible for all. And several other networks that you can absolutely get involved in if you're interested in learning more, engaging more, by going to caeh.ca. And the last part of work that we do that I want to mention is advocacy. So we do regularly advocate to both federal and provincial governments for policy change. Most recently, we had the Vote Housing campaign, which was a campaign to put housing and homelessness, including housing affordability, on the platforms of major political parties for the last election. So the big question, the million-dollar question, what does homelessness look like? This is a really hard question to answer. So I'm kind of like, ooh, why did I pose this question? But it's a really hard question to answer because we're talking about people. We're talking about our neighbors. Homelessness is a very complex problem. There is a lot going on in terms of homelessness. But by attempting to answer this question together, by learning more about what homelessness looks like and what those complexities are, we get much closer to a solution and much closer to responding, talking about homelessness in a way that directly meets the needs of our neighbors who don't have a place to call home. So I did put a definition of homelessness up there. And really there are three different forms, major forms of homelessness. There's unsheltered homelessness, which are folks that might be sleeping rough, which means sleeping outside, sleeping in their cars, sleeping in vacant buildings. Also emergency sheltered homelessness, which is when folks access temporary services in a place like a violence against women shelter or a homelessness emergency shelter. And then also people who are provisionally accommodated are considered as experiencing homelessness. We don't necessarily see these folks in the same way that we would see somebody sleeping on the corner of downtown, but they are still experiencing homelessness and count towards an overall picture of homelessness in the community. So provisionally accommodated really means that they're in a transitional space or they're in a temporary space that is not permanent, and they might not have access to the same rights under the Residential Tenancies Act as somebody, as you and I would, in terms of renting a place or living in a permanent home. So they might be exiting from a provincial institution like a hospital or jail, or in other provisionally accommodated spaces. So I'm going to go through some myth busting, and this is not to say that you or I hold these myths. Instead, it is really to start to understand homelessness and start to really pull at that thread to learn more about the complexities of homelessness. So I thought I would pose some things in terms of myth and fact to really start to paint that picture. So the first common myth is that people choose to be homeless. It's a choice. That is a myth, a really big myth. In fact, people experiencing homelessness usually have exhausted all other options. And they're dealing with circumstances that might make it difficult for them to maintain their housing. When we say that homelessness is a choice, we are thinking about the individual. We're putting blame on the individual instead of the structural or policy changes or lack of supports or housing unaffordability. And so what we try to do is really move away from thinking about homelessness as a choice and more about what things could have led to this person going to their last resort, to this person no longer able to keep their home. Another common myth is that people experiencing homelessness should find a job. If they found a job, they wouldn't be homeless anymore. That is a huge common myth. In fact, many people experiencing homelessness have jobs. And for those who don't, there are unique, significant barriers to finding or maintaining a job, such as, a lack of transportation. They don't have regular access to showers. And so it's totally a myth that people experiencing homelessness should just find a job. Instead, there are a lot of other factors that come into play in terms of a person's stability in housing. The third is that most people who experience homelessness are addicts. This is also a myth. Just like the housed population, there is a proportion of folks who are experiencing homelessness who have a poor relationship with substances, right? There are a ton of people that I know who are housed who are alcohol dependent, who have issues with substance misuse. And so even though there might be overlap with those who use, in terms of the homelessness population, there is that same overlap in terms of the housed population as well. And so we really can't assume that everybody who is experiencing homelessness or housing instability are in fact substance involved. And so this goes back again to thinking more about people and their unique circumstances and how a lot of times folks have much more in common with people who are housed, even if they're homeless. And the last one that the last myth that I want to bust is that some people are not ready for housing. And this is my favorite to dig into because I'm a very strong advocate of a housing first approach, which I'm sure we will talk a little bit more later when we get to the panel discussion. But really, everyone deserves a place to call home, no matter where they are at in their life. And so we can't require people to, for example, be sober in order to have a right to a home, or be at a certain place in their life where we think they're going to be more stable in housing. I think that we all know that people experiencing homelessness are extremely resilient, and we should really give them kudos for that resiliency. And we can provide housing first, and then think about what types of supports does this person need to stay in their housing. And so housing first is an approach, a philosophy, and a program that assumes no readiness of requirements, that says, let's take care of your basic needs first by putting a roof over your head, and not, sort of making you jump through any hoops before we're able to provide you with a home. And so all of these things, all of these myths really speak to what is easy to see. And so it's really easy to see in terms of homelessness, thinking about their poor choices that they might have made, addiction, mental illness, right? We might think of homelessness and think of those that we see often in our community sleeping rough, as opposed to thinking about those other forms of homelessness or families experiencing homelessness, youth experiencing homelessness at any age. And so it's really tough to form a picture of homelessness if we only consider what we can see. Instead, we need to think about those roots, those structural roots that might lead to homelessness, including things like health inequity, a lack of employment opportunities, poverty, justice system, and the discrimination related to the justice system, child protection system, colonization, discrimination, and the like. And so when we think about homelessness and form ideas about homelessness, let's just be mindful of all the other roots, all the other structural roots that might be leading to somebody to experience homelessness or to lose their housing. Modern mass homelessness, that's a tongue twister, looks a lot different than what it used to look like, right? This is new in terms of homelessness that we see today. Really only started in the 1980s and 1990s, which for some is quite a long time ago, and for others it doesn't feel like that long ago. But really modern mass homelessness started as a result of big policy changes. We've seen since that time continued decline in wages, even with mandatory minimum wages. We've seen reduced benefit levels in terms of pensions and social assistance, and a continued shrinking supply of affordable housing, both in terms of losing federal investments in government-assisted housing or community housing, rent geared to income housing, as well as the financialization of rental housing, which takes affordable housing off the market, which essentially means using housing as a way to make money. A lot of people will purchase rental housing and make it no longer affordable for folks. The rent is not affordable. And then at the same time, we saw deinstitutionalization definitely before, the 1980s, 1990s, but we had a continued waves of deinstitutionalization paired with a lack of funding for housing and supports in communities. The folks who are providing support to those who face physical and mental health challenges on the street are incredible staff. I commend you for those efforts in terms of supporting our homeless population. They do not have nearly enough funding across the country in every community to be able to support everybody in need. And last, we've seen systemic denials of access to justice and fundamental human rights. This has really taken a turn in the last couple of years with the National Housing Strategy, which has entrenched the right to housing in Canada, which is an amazing and very exciting thing, but we're still really learning about what does it even mean to exercise your right to housing. Nobody can really answer that in a super clear way. And I want to say, why should we care? And I'm definitely not saying that to the folks who are on the line today, because you are showing that you care a great deal just by wanting to use your Tuesday evening, to use an hour and a half of your time to learn more about homelessness in your community, which I find so amazing. But I did want to put some stats up here, not to scare you, not to paint a really negative picture, but to just talk about how homelessness and housing need affects us all. Over 36% of Canadians have been homeless themselves or know someone who has. That is a whole whack of people across Canada. And on average, 235,000 people in Canada experience homelessness each year. That is a really, really, really large number of folks experiencing homelessness in Canada. And then we also have 15% of Canadians who are worried about paying their costs next month, and pair that with an increase of evictions, right? So homelessness is part of our lives. It's something that we all need to care about because it affects us all in different ways. But there's definitely hope. We have seen huge shifts in Canada, across Canada, from managing to ending homelessness. We are on a road of recovery from all of those big policy shifts that we've seen over the last couple decades. And by that, by ending homelessness, I mean that a person's experience of homelessness is rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And so that really means we can say that we've ended homelessness when we have all the right supports, finances, programming, approaches in place so that homelessness is prevented wherever it can be. But there'll always be situations that lead some people into homelessness. It's just the way that it is. But if a person does come into homelessness, we have everything that we need as a community to be able to respond quickly so that their experience of homelessness is brief, and also do so in a way that promotes their stability so that they do not re-enter into homelessness again. And so I've said the term ending homelessness a lot. And so I kind of just wanted to paint a picture of really what that means. It means that it's rare, it's brief, and that it's non-reoccurring. And I just want to give you some examples of what I mean of how we're shifting as a country from managing to ending homelessness. And the first example of that is through the Built for Zero Canada initiative, which was based on an initiative in the United States from a couple of years ago known as the 100,000 Homes Campaign. What that campaign did was aim to house 100,000 of the most vulnerable people experiencing homelessness in several municipalities across the US. And when they met that goal, which is amazing, 100,000 homes for people, they decided that they didn't want to count up housing placements. Instead, they wanted to count down to ending homelessness. They wanted to see how can we get the number of people in need down, as opposed to only thinking about it in terms of building more homes. Because we can't just build more homes, provide more affordable homes. In order to end homelessness, we also have to think about our systems of care. And so after they decided they wanted to count down, that's when they became Built for Zero. And Canada followed a very similar path in running the 20,000 Homes campaign in several communities across Canada, and then shifting into Built for Zero. Also, I actually have not yet had a chance to watch the throne speech today. I'm not sure if anybody has and can catch me up. But last year, the throne speech, it's pretty dry. So I saw Kelly shaking your head. It's pretty dry, but last year was very exciting. So last year at the throne speech, in terms of the federal government, this was the first time that our federal government in Canada committed to ending chronic homelessness. That is just major proof of the shift from managing Band-Aid solutions to ending homelessness. So the federal government has said it is a priority for Canadians to end homelessness. It's a priority for our government to end long-term chronic homelessness, so that those folks who have been homeless for 6 months or more over the past year, we want to make sure that they get stably housed. That is an incredible commitment that we've never seen before. And lastly, we're all eating a lot of pie. No, I'm just kidding. So we have been really moving towards seeing opportunities and efforts related to ending homelessness as more of a garden as opposed to a pie. So we see staff working with people experiencing homelessness. We see agencies as a whole. We see local governments, provincial governments deciding to think about how they can work together, as opposed to saying, this is my piece of the pie. This is the piece of homelessness that I work in. Instead, we're wondering, how can we coordinate services, lean into what we're good at, that allows us to grow systems of care that really feed off one another and give growth and light to new opportunities, as opposed to really limiting our programming to only, this is the piece of pie that I work with. I'm not sure what my neighbor over there on the other side of the plate is doing. Instead, we're really working together. And so we're seeing more opportunities as a garden as opposed to a pie. And I know that Oxford County is just amazing at this in terms of really working together. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more from Stephanie about the coalition and other things that are happening in terms of bringing different folks together to really work on ending homelessness. And so what communities do is they, in terms of ending homelessness, is look at what does homelessness look like on the ground, like I said in the beginning, and then how can we continue looking at it since it's a changing problem? What are some things that we can do that directly speak to what homelessness looks like in our community? So for example, if you had data on how many people were experiencing homelessness in October and you had 10 youth in November, you looked at your data again, you had 20 youth. In December, you had 30 youth. You'd know that youth homelessness specifically, as an example, is growing in the community. And so you're really going to target your efforts and focus your efforts around that particular thing that you're seeing in your community. And so that's how communities are really making progress in ending homelessness. And at the same time are continuing to research and bring to light best practice approaches, such as thinking about what the right to housing actually means, centering the voices of clients, centering the voices and expertise of those with lived experience, adopting housing first philosophies, and looking at their data in terms of equity. How can we make sure that we're providing equitable responses to homelessness? And so it's working, right? A lot of communities across Canada are making great strides in the effort to end homelessness. 2 communities have actually ended either chronic or veteran homelessness in Canada in the last year, which is incredible. And 7 communities across Canada have measurably reduced homelessness month over month, whether that be chronic or veteran homelessness. And I'm going to end us off by just saying that we're all part of the solution, and thank everyone for coming today to learn more about what homelessness looks like, because that is the first and important step to continue taking, to continue learning and unlearning how we see, view, respond to homelessness in the community and across Canada. And we're only really going to make progress if we work together. And I just always really like this quote. I always lean on this quote, which is do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better, because it's all about continuous improvement. Like I said before, there's no one size fits all approach. There's no magic bullet to ending homelessness. And so all we can do is keep on learning, trying, and never giving up. Thank you so much.
Lisa, that was fantastic. I mean, it was just such a great, fulsome overview. And I think I'm going to come back in a minute to something I want to touch on. But we have a question, and I thought I might jump in now with it, just in case, as in your work, especially across the country, and as you do so much research and comparisons, you might have an answer to this. And the question is, what did society do before the social safety nets were in place? And so we know that they have been going, those nets have been diminishing since the 80s, but what was happening before that?
Yeah, I think homelessness at that time looked really different. And so there was a lot more accommodations for folks to temporarily stay, like boarding houses, a lot more efforts around rapid rehousing, not in the traditional approach that we see it today, but more so about being able to find affordable housing short term, and then being able to move into permanent housing that you can afford. Right now, it's really difficult to first find that temporary space and then to move out of that temporary space into something that's affordable long term. Also, there, has really been social assistance for a long time. I don't even really know when that started. And so we had a decline in what that looked like exactly. It's shifted a bit. And so overall, we see thousands of people, unfortunately, on community housing wait lists or rent geared to income wait lists in municipalities across Ontario. And so that's just kind of tells us about both the increasing amount of unaffordability that's happening, and at the same time, the decreasing amount of resources that we're able to give folks to really buffer and fill that gap in what they're making and what their rent might be.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I just want to also in particular point out your slide on the modern mass homelessness, because earlier today, Stephanie and I were chatting. We share an office, so she's just upstairs, and we were chatting about, and we're going to get to this in our next question and subsequent ones as well, but the complexities of this. And this didn't just happen. It's been years and policies and bad policies and lack of investments, et cetera, et cetera. But you kind of brought it all together in one little concise slide to at least give us a snippet of how there are many factors at play. So it's a great segue to our next question. And I'm going to ask Shanda, if I may, that, we just heard certainly from Lisa and as we were preparing earlier for our work here, that homelessness is it's a complicated and a complex social issue. And so for many here in Oxford, and in particular in Woodstock, because we know Woodstock has, as the county seat where the county services are, has probably some higher numbers, certainly, and some more visibility. But for many people, it seems like this is just a COVID problem, that this just happened really through COVID or since COVID. But we know that that's actually not really the case. And so maybe, Shanda, you could give us some information on how this has evolved to become such an issue here in Oxford. And what are some of the factors that's caused this to really sort of explode into such a visual issue now for so many people, and sadly for such a challenging time for so many people?
For sure. And I think, that slide that you did show, Lisa, that talked about, that was a great snapshot to provide to all of us to see it so clearly there. I think what COVID did is that it pushed it into a visible area where we as a community maybe had not seen it as much, as we certainly did when libraries closed, when restaurants closed, when places closed that folks would normally go to find warmth or cool in the summer. Those, that sort of absolutely pushed it in our face, and we saw it in a different way. I think what's happening now in our community is that we're definitely dealing with all of the things that Lisa mentioned, with rising housing costs, lack of housing. So many of our community has dealt with homelessness in a way, or that fear of it, or housing has been made to be something that we are looking at completely differently and in crisis mode, I would say, locally. When we look at landlords that are now selling those income properties in this market, it's displacing so many families. So aside from the ones that we're visibly seeing downtown, I can speak on the daily, I'm receiving calls as well from families with children, folks who are working, who are living in motels. This has become something that our community has not really ever had to face at this level. And I think too that when we talk about Oxford County and remember that we are a municipality that is more than Woodstock itself, we've seen so many folks that are struggling with housing in Tillsonburg, Ingersoll, those rural areas, be forced to come here, because this is where we do have that emergency shelter option, which is the inn shelter. So for those folks who are in that position where they are in the continuum of housing, where they are in crisis mode and it's an emergency, Woodstock is the city or the place where people have to come when they need that place to go at night. So that is pushing folks too to be more visible. It may look like where are people coming from, but these are your community members, many of them.
So we know that we basically have almost a zero vacancy rate. I think it's about 1% or maybe just a little below 1%. Can you speak about the challenge that is, and then maybe the wait list as well? And I know Lisa mentioned wait lists as well. We have massive wait lists, don't we?
We do. Yes, and Woodstock is at a 1% vacancy rate. Tillsonburg, Ingersoll are just under 3%, which they say when it's under that mark, that it's basically like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Like housing has never been more challenging to find. Our RGI wait lists for rent geared income housing, those types of options are at the 8 to 10 plus year mark. And one of the challenges is that when someone moves into an RGI unit, they needed that support at that time. Maybe they have progressed, they're working, their income's changed, but now they too can't find anywhere to move to. So those units are not being turned over the way they once were, where we had people moving and then we could allow that opportunity for someone else. Our county is working very hard at all of those opportunities, at developing housing options, looking at different ways. And we've just really honestly had to get very creative. And we know that many of these Band-Aid solutions are just that. They are temporary. They are not, certainly by no means, what any of us want to see, especially working on a housing first model, which we proudly do. We are very engaged with Lisa Bell, who's given this lovely presentation. We work we are connected with her as we aim towards these goals in our community. So the vacancy rates, there is no housing when it comes up the competitive level that is now a reality. I have had people seeking housing tell me some interesting stories, landlords themselves, where folks will show up with a year's worth of rent in cash in hand, outbidding like we see with housing, where like houses, like the sale of homes, where now people will go to a rental opportunity and offer more than even what the rent is asking out of desperation to get these places. So you can look at someone or the folks that are in our community that are in receipt of social assistance and ask ourselves, how does someone who is on such a limited income even compete in this world when folks who are working full-time are struggling themselves? The calls that we receive now at the county are from seniors as well. Like I spoke to a 73-year-old woman the other day in tears because her landlord has sold her home that she's lived in for 15 plus years. This is the face of homelessness as well in our community. And I think it's important for us to talk about that as well.
I think that's a really good point, because certainly over the last many number of months and probably, sort of a bit through the duration of COVID. But there's been a lot of talk about homelessness. There's been certainly lots of publicity and social media comments from lots of folks on homelessness. But there's always this assumption, or appears to be this assumption, that they're speaking about people that are living in particular on the streets, living rough downtown, and certainly they are homeless and very vulnerable and require supports and services. But that is one probably very small piece of the overall homelessness situation that we have, isn't it? Absolutely. And I want to recognize that conversation that does happen in our community. We so many of us are boots to the ground out there helping folks. The important thing to remember too is that we know it is a lot like more than just a roof over someone's head. There are so many supports that are needed to help keep somebody successfully housed. And these are all areas where I'm proud to say, our community, we have so many different agencies, but we are working together. We work collaboratively. Our
community. Oxford County has gotten so great at doing that. We are reaching out now more and working together in teams to support folks more than we ever have. And I think that's something that we can be really proud of.
I agree. And it takes a village, right? We say that all the time.
Absolutely.
Steph, I've got a question for you. So especially when we think about some of the social media negativity, I would say, that we often will see or encounter. We know that there's lots of rumors about people being bussed in and they don't belong here. And I would venture to say that every community across our country has the same rumor. I personally believe it's an easy rumor to start and adhere to, because if they're not our people, then it's easier to say we don't have to do anything to help them. And I just saw actually Elgin St. Thomas had something today on social media about they actually are their people. They're not being bussed into Elgin St. Thomas, which I thought was interesting. But this, about a year ago now, as a matter of fact, Steph, you and some volunteers were able to coordinate a registry week and interviewed people who were living rough, who are homeless in our county. Thankfully, that was because of funding that we had received through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And you and your team really did a great job in getting good information. And so can you tell us a little bit about what people shared when you interviewed them and what you learned from the process and how you're sharing it with us tonight and others to help create change?
Sure, thanks, Kelly. So I have a question later that I'm going to talk more about the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative. But I wanted to kind of preface this that in the piece that the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative worked together to do the registry week in November 2020, as Kelly said. And registry weeks are actually done across Canada and are considered best practice to understand at that point in time how many people are experiencing homelessness. And it's really done for a number of different reasons, for awareness, so to kind of bring the issues to light, but for planning purposes, understanding people's needs on that bigger scale. So we had 45 volunteers that were at 25 different sites across the county, chatting with people experiencing homelessness. And we also went to encampments, places people may be congregating. We even had a phone line, which we didn't think we'd get any calls, and we surprisingly did. People wanted to share their story, and I think that's really important to recognize. We spoke to 93 individuals in that point in time. And so we know that this is a snapshot and doesn't actually represent all people experiencing homelessness. And those 93 individuals represented 103 people. So that sounds confusing, but it's because 93 adults, and then within that, there were 10 children that they were speaking on behalf of them when there was a family. So we know, again, snapshot in time. The survey asks all kinds of questions from your age to different identity questions to where you're staying that night. And I think the important piece I think to think about is, I think Lisa mentioned it when we were looking at the definition of homelessness, and it's been mentioned by Shanda as well in terms of people staying in motels and different pieces like that. We actually saw in the survey 46% of people were staying in provisionally housed. So Lisa mentioned that category. So that's people staying in motels or couch surfing. So that was actually the majority of people were in that category where they were staying tonight. I think that's really critical to understand. Even chatting with people who would share a story that they're paying, for their family with their baby, $1,700 to stay in a motel and can't find housing. So these are common pieces that we're seeing in our community. We're definitely seeing a shift to having more women experiencing homelessness in Canada, across Canada. And so the numbers reflected that as well. And then I think the other interesting part of questions that we asked about where you're staying tonight, and heard in terms of geography. Not everybody was staying in Woodstock that night. We had 8% identify they were staying in Ingersoll, 11% in Tillsonburg, and 8% in other other areas within the county. So I think that that's an important piece. I think the other thing about being bussed in, so getting to that one, I sometimes struggle with this one because part of me is like, does it really matter where someone's from if they need help? So that's my first sort of response. But then I think, okay, if this is a myth, we need to talk about it. And so we did add a question on the survey about this, about where people hailed from. We didn't say it like that, but, and I think it was super interesting because I think any service provider would tell you that it's not true that people are bussed in for a lot of different reasons. You have to be a resident of Oxford County to access shelter. And so that's a kind of key piece. And then other pieces are, well, people will tell you where they're from, and 60% of people that we spoke with have lived in Oxford for more than 10 years. So that's pretty significant. I mean, I don't know at what point you're considered a resident in a community, right? So I thought that was really important. The other thing that kind of really stuck out for me was this question we asked, and I think it's asked, Lisa wouldn't probably know this, but I think it's asked on all, across Canada, on all Registry Week surveys. But there's a question about, do you, I'm trying to remember the exact wording, do you have any planned activities other than just surviving that make you feel happy and fulfilled? And 51% of people we spoke to do not have any planned activities other than surviving that make them feel happy. And then I think the last piece to kind of hit on here was we did ask some questions about factors preventing permanent housing. And just to echo kind of what Lisa said in terms of that policy context piece, when speaking with folks experiencing homelessness, you know, the top 3 answers that came out about factors preventing permanent housing were directly about that, you know, unaffordable housing, lack of income or insufficient income for living, things that we know to be true. And so I think it's that myth that Lisa spoke to about this isn't the blame of the individual. There's many structural and policy pieces that come into play here. So I think those are some key highlights. I don't know if I answered your question, Kelly.
You did indeed. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And now I'm going to actually go over to Amanda, if I may. And you know, again, one of the goals this evening is to really shine a light on the variety, the complexities, the complications around homelessness, and to paint a much better picture so people can understand and then hopefully mobilize action and compassion, empathy, and, you know, create that village that really wants something better. And so, not to dwell on the negativity, but we've all seen and heard some, I would say, really kind of cruel and awful comments as people who are homeless are centered out. What I think is interesting is sometimes those that are centered out and referred to as those people actually may or may not really be homeless. There might be other struggles, but they actually might have a roof over their head at the end of the day. And so, you know, we hear people saying, get rid of them, drive them out of town, ticket them for loitering, stop feeding them, sadly, is also one. And so some of this negative, this narrative negative, that the people on the street, I think, deserve, that they've made their choice. This is their choice, and they sort of deserve what has happened to them or what is happening to them. And we know that that's not really the case at all. And so to help people perhaps understand more about how someone this could happen and what really is choice and isn't choice. Amanda, could you speak a little bit about your experience? Because you are literally boots on the ground, and you are working with people every day where they are, where they're at, and to help where you can. And I think you are really well positioned to speak a little bit about this.
Thanks, Kelly. So yeah, so as Shanda said earlier, some of them are on systems, so Ontario Works or ODSP. We know those incomes aren't high. So whether they're housed or not housed, sometimes they come together because that's their friends downtown. If my friends are hanging out in a park or Sometimes we get together at the pool and we do a swim, or we'll do a walk around the track or whatever. I go where my friends are. So many of these people that we see downtown are actually down there because they're there to see their friends. Maybe only 2 of them are actually homeless, and the other 10 are just down there because the meal is downtown that they would be able to get, which helps them stretch their limited income that they are receiving. And then they also know that if it's a bus day, that maybe they have an ear infection that's bothering them. So then our nurse practitioner can look at them. Maybe they want to speak with someone from CMHA. So they have peer support workers out on the streets too. So we have all these services as providers that are downtown. So of course, everyone is going to come downtown because that we've created that, whether we are paid providers as we are, or whether we're even just community members that are out supporting individuals, because there's many other people that are just in community that are doing great work too, that aren't being paid. They're just volunteers that are out handing out meals, giving coats out, making sure they have warm blankets. Everybody is coming together to try and ensure that they have what they need. Everyone deserves the right to eat. It doesn't matter what your situation in life is. You deserve food for the day. You deserve health care. We deserve to be warm if we can, right? Like there's human rights that we deserve these things, and everyone deserves these things. So we try to just make sure that we give them to them. Nobody shouldn't go without food.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what a caring community does. That's what a village does. It cares for the village, right? So thank you very much. Shanda, I'm going to go back up to you. And we've had a question, but it actually fits really nicely into my next question. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of an overview of what emergency housing services we actually have here in Oxford. Kind of what they are, where they are, how many. Someone asked a question about how many, and sorry, I'm going to have to scroll up here. How many shelter beds do we have for the county? And much to Amanda's point, I mean, many of the services are in Oxford, although in Woodstock, they're not all here. There are services everywhere, and some services go out as well. But so that people are interested in what are the kind of what do we have in terms of shelter, and give us some perspective on that. And I know that you and your co-workers at the county have really moved mountains to try and meet some of the incredibly growing needs and the complexities really through COVID as well. That's only just added on to another crisis. So maybe if you could speak a bit about that. Oh, you're muted. There is not a Zoom meeting out there that doesn't say those words.
I'm sorry. So in Oxford County, we have the Inn, which is the most, I'd say, well-known or most discussed option for homelessness for 16 and above, age 16 and above. That is located at St. Paul's Anglican Church at 723 Dundas Street. It is year round, which was a great thing that, the Inn was able to offer. We are right now, prior to COVID, the maximum number of beds was 20 with some wiggle room. COVID obviously changed that and new protocols came in. Currently, as of right now, there are 12 beds available. And we are working right now on increasing that, trying to figure out a way to change that. Because what we're also realizing is as the weather gets colder, the need has obviously increased. The Inn is becoming full quicker than it had in the past. And so that is obviously presenting some issues. The county does have supports in place when the Inn is full that folks can be then connected through the police to the Salvation Army, where they are supported with a motel room. It's again, not the ideal situation, but what we're facing with in the moment. How do we help that person right now? So again, right now we are trying to increase those numbers and, you know, create a better pathway for folks who are experiencing homelessness. In addition to the shelter, we have temporary emergency housing available through the Salvation Army. And that is there to support specifically families with children for up to 6 weeks while they are trying to seek more permanent housing options. And folks who are in need of that support can connect with Jennifer at the Salvation Army, who I have to give a shout out to in our community. Like, we'd be lost without Jennifer. She has worked day and night throughout this entire pandemic, and has continued to show up for her community. So I can't say enough about the support she's been to many of us, and in particular to us at the county. And then there is DASO, or Domestic Abuse Services of Oxford, for specifically women and children. So women 16 and above, with or without children, that is a specific option for our women in the community who are dealing specifically with domestic violence. So those are the 3 options. And then we've sort of created some other ways of providing for our community through the pandemic, such as motel stays and things like that, where I also want to discuss on the pathway to getting housed. When we look at someone who is struggling and without housing, we start out with the shelter, and then it doesn't end there. That is where all the other community supports come into play, and we work through that pathway with that person and trying to get them moved into something that's better for them. But that can also take time. It takes a number of different supports in providing that roof over the head, and the supports that we've talked about that are needed to help keep that person housed moving forward. So the transitional housing program that's been offered through the community health center, that has been a great addition to that pathway. When someone is homeless, that is a goal, right? Is to, maybe that would be another step for that person, is to go from shelter to a transitional housing program with the CHC staff. And we are sort of trying to connect some supports in the meantime to get them maybe in a position to, while they're waiting maybe for an opening to come up at the transitional house, which could be the motel supports. And what the county has done is we sort of piloted this idea of helping and supporting folks. So to make room in the shelter, for one, so maybe they're in a position where the motel stay is a good option for them right now. And then they're linked with a caseworker, and intensive case management is sort of put into play, and those goals are worked on. They're right away connected with those supports in our community. We complete referrals over to the community health center, who stepped back from housing seeking and is more focusing on their original role in our community, which was housing stability. But there is a pathway, and there's all different ways to enter into all of these housing options that I've just mentioned. But it is something that we are on the daily helping community members enter into this pathway and try to exit it and find some secured housing that is affordable. And I really do want to say, when you look at someone who's in receipt of Ontario Works, their maximum check each month that we hear people talk about, that is $733 for a single person. If you can think about that for a moment, how someone, and that's $733 if they have shelter that they need to pay for. So that breakdown for somebody in receipt of assistance is $390 of that $733 is towards shelter. The $343 is towards basic needs. when you look at someone on receipt of ODSP, that amount is more. It is $1,169 a month. Again, I ask you, how does somebody find housing in this community right now on that budget? And so these supports in our community that are helping with meals and things like that, we can kind of gain a better understanding as to why that is so important and needed for so many people that are on social assistance right now in our community.
Absolutely. And I think you painted a really great picture, because for the folks that are joining us from home and wanting to learn more, and when you think about how little some people have to try and spread out to not only cover their shelter, but their food and their transportation and anything and everything that they may need. It's not next to impossible. It's not if they could budget better. It is impossible. Like, it is just, you cannot make those dollars spread far enough to make that work. And you know, if you go to a bank to get a mortgage, there's a threshold that they don't want you to go over. And that if your mortgage is higher than a certain percentage, and I forget what that is, then you don't qualify for that much money, because they know that you still have to eat. And they know that you still have to, you know, move around and get services and perhaps, you know, put clothes on your back, etc. And sadly, we have people that are now spending 80-90% or more just on shelter. And
ideally,
so doing that, yeah,
30% of your income should be for shelter. And I also want to mention the other things that the county, that we do in the Human Services Department to help people in our community, because I think that this is helpful to know as well, is we do have a rent supplement program that we're doing things, we're creating things, we're coming up with ways to help people get housed, and that is supplementing somebody's rent. You don't have to be in receipt of just a social assistance to access that support. We do have the Chippy program that many people may have heard about. We are all about helping people keep their housing. We cannot get this message out enough that if you are a community partner or a community member and you know someone who is housed, but they're behind in rent or their utilities are at risk of disconnect, there are ways that we can help. And I really encourage people to reach out to the county, to our Human Services Department, to seek out what some of those options may be, and what that, you know, how we can help you, because now more than ever, for the lucky few who do have housing and you need support and help to keep it, let us know. We really do want to try to support and help people in our community with that. So there are lots of initiatives that we have in place. The last month's rent deposit, when somebody does find something, how did they come up with that first and last month's rent at once? That's very challenging and difficult. Again, the Chippy program is there to support our community with that need as well. If anyone has questions or needs support with that, again, to reach out to the county, and we can look at that. And it's just another way that we're trying to support our community members.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Shanda. I know we hear a lot, it's the county, it's the county, it's the county. And I think this is, you know, you've just shone a light on all of the things that the county is doing and how much they've adapted and partnered with others to try and kind of move mountains. But we've also heard, as the evening has gone on, certainly there are issues around healthcare, and there are issues around mental health, and there are issues around addictions, amongst other things, employment, stabilized situations, violence, domestic partner violence, etc. So there's, again, it takes a village. And Steph, I'm going to go over to you for a question, if I may. I think everything we've been hearing, you know, has sometimes we'll often hear people talk about there's duplication of services. And I think kind of to the point that this is not necessarily always duplication. It's we need multiple services doing different things. So it might be multiple groups doing meals, but there's a lot of people who need meals or canned goods or whatever that might be. And so, it's sometimes because we don't see what's going on necessarily with our own eyes, it's easy to think that nothing is. But I know that you know that there are lots of connections going on, lots of services, both professional support services as well as sort of volunteer driven or even community member driven services. And so you know what's going on and how people have come together to really try and meet some of these growing needs over the past number of years. Could you tell us a little bit about the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative, as well as the End Homelessness Oxford initiative? Because I think that's, again, another hopeful forward piece for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's many great things happening, and I know it's sometimes hard to celebrate when we know people are experiencing horrible situations, and so we want to be hopeful, but it's that balance, right, of recognizing that life, just surviving is extremely difficult. So I won't speak to all the great things in the community because there are many in terms of partners doing things, and like you said, volunteers working towards things, which is awesome. But I'll talk to the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative. I thought it was really cool, Lisa, what you put up about the garden versus the pie. And so I think we're trying really hard to do the garden approach as a community, looking at, you mentioned how to coordinate services, how to grow systems of care. And so I think what's been kind of cool about the Oxford Housing Action Collaborative is we kind of started out as a group of partners that thought, well, we could do something collectively related to moving the needle on housing crisis. We didn't know what, we just knew we needed to work together because we know that collectively we can do so much more together, especially when we're dealing with complex social issues. The answer isn't to work in the pie or the silos, right? And so we thought, you know what, we can do something together. And what's been cool about this whole process, we started in 2019. I think now we're over 15 or more partners around the table, but many other extensions into other pieces and connections with other community groups. Is when we started, things were very different in 2019. I think when we set our priorities, I think we set them December 2019 or January 2020. So right before the pandemic. So it's been about 2 years working on them, and it's been pretty exciting because we've actually seen a lot of changes and shifts in even how we talk about things, how we work together, even how as a community we understand the issue. Because I think when we first started into this, we had people that would say to us, oh, there's only 3 people experiencing homelessness in our community. And we would be like, no, oftentimes in rural communities, homelessness is hidden. And so I think things have changed a lot, but the really cool part is the commitment of the partners to learn from other communities that have ended chronic homelessness or are reducing the ones that Lisa mentioned. So what can we do differently? What can we do together? So that in 2019, the priorities that we set were to get a count of people experiencing homelessness, which you heard about earlier, because we didn't have that understanding as a community. Improving the shelter system. And so there's been work on that collectively. The county and emergency shelter partners have been actually implementing a bunch of new things to be responsive, and that's been happening. But also part of that is we've been looking at what are our recommendations to kind of make some enhancements. And so we spoke with people experiencing homelessness that have access to shelter, and with folks that haven't access to shelter as well, to try to hear from them what's some changes that we could make. And we're also spoke with staff, and so that there's some really cool stuff coming out of that we're gonna, as a group, come up with recommendations and move forward. I won't go into the other ones in detail, but I think the other one that Kelly probably wanted me to hit on was that we had this kind of thought that we really need to create a community awareness strategy, because part of the challenge is this NIMBYism, or not in my backyard. And so how do we counter that, and how do we try to shift that mindset, but also because people, it's not fair for people to have to deal with stigma, and it feeds into everything, even their ability to rent a unit, right? If there's stigma tied to them as a person, or if they don't have a permanent address, it makes it more difficult to make that move. So we did start a campaign. So if you want to check out, I think we put it maybe in the chat box, we can put it again, endhomelessnessoxford.ca. It's the Housing Collaborative's basically website where we're trying to put information for people around calls to action or resources that they can check out and learn more. But also that we wanted to have this bigger campaign to try to shift mindsets. So you may have heard of it, you may have not. We just launched in the fall, and it's, I think, picking up some speed. But what we can ask people to do that are on the call, if you're interested in becoming a champion, we have people in the community that have signed up to be champions, and we have coordinated messaging that's going out probably once every other week that we ask people to share with people they know. And we're also looking at doing some advocacy pieces as well, connecting with various levels of politicians and whatnot. So I think it's a exciting time around that piece, because it is, let's build up momentum and kind of take a stand. I think there have been a lot of great things done in our community municipally, and but I think there are some calls to action at all different levels of government, because as I think Lisa has alluded to, this is a number of different pieces coming together, right? Not just politician end, but also on the side of helping to speak with landlords, and maybe someone might consider changing their mindset around who they're willing to rent to. And so I think there's a lot we can do. It's just trying to build that momentum. So the cool part, I could talk forever about this, I'll stop. But I was gonna say the cool part is the Housing Collaborative actually is meeting on Thursday to reset our new priorities, because we've actually achieved a lot in of those 5. And with the context shifting, we have some new things that we need to address. And we're really excited to be learning from other communities that have ended chronic homelessness, because we believe it is possible to end homelessness and have seen other communities do it. So there's a lot of exciting things that we can do collectively to see change. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph. And I'm going to ask one more official question to Amanda. And our chat box is going crazy with all kinds of questions. And I know we're not going to be able to get to them all. But as soon as I ask this one, we will try and make our way through some of them. And that way we can, if you can't stay past our 8:30 deadline, for those of you at home, you at least have had sort of the overview of the evening. So Amanda, on our last official program question, I want to ask you that we know that downtown businesses across our community need us as citizens and as consumers to visit, to shop, to dine, and to do business. And we also know that some people are uncomfortable or even scared with what they see as maybe someone who's homeless, or maybe someone they presume to be perhaps unstable, or perhaps using, addicted to, drugs or something like that. And so there's a lot of assumptions, but we know that people can be quite uncomfortable. And you are on the streets downtown and across our county all the time. And so do you have a little bit of advice for citizens to maybe make them feel more comfortable so that they can indeed go downtown, they can support their community and their businesses, and that maybe they could feel comfortable speaking to someone they see that might be really vulnerable or in a bad situation?
Yeah. So most of the people, if you smile at them, make eye contact with them, they're people. They're there, and they're still people. They have a story. Some of the stories that I've heard are some are heart-wrenching and some are heartwarming, to hear what they've been through or what they've done to support another community member. Some of the people have the biggest hearts that are on the streets or downtown, and they want to help too, right? They'll give their food to each other and they support each other. Just a simple hello, how are you doing? If you notice somebody that's been sitting at Tim Hortons, let's say for an hour, and you have a chance, buy them a coffee. If you're walking by coffee culture and someone's sitting there, buy them a coffee. Give them a Tim Hortons card, carry an extra $5 one in your pocket so that you can give it to them, especially this time of year when it's so cold. $5, $10 Tim's card can get them a warm cup of soup. Speak to them. They're like anybody else that you would pass on the street. No different than if you and I were crossing our paths on the street, Kelly. I would smile at you and I would say, hello, how's your day going? You know, whether I know you or not. So do the same. They are community members, no different than I'm a community member, than Shanda's a community member, than Lisa's a community member. We're all community members and we need to all be treated the same. They're not scary. They're really not.
Thank you very much, because I think that that's a really important message to convey, because first and foremost, we are all human, and these are our neighbors, our friends, they were previous co-workers or family members or people we went to school with. And so I think that this is really important that we remember that first and foremost, and that again, we can each do a little something to make a difference. Okay, so now we have a number of questions, as I said, in the chat. And I'm going to ask a couple, and then I'll kind of officially close the evening down, and then we can stay on a bit longer if necessary. So one of the questions, and there is nothing that's intended to be political about this this evening, other than we do know that any successful community that has ended homelessness or that has really made a significant difference, it is done in partnership with all levels of government. I mean, again, government partners, as well as the nonprofit sector, as well as faith community and others are all part of that equation. So while it's not a political comment or question, there is a question specific to Lisa to ask, and it's about an upcoming decision that Oxford County Council is facing regarding the provision of a 24/7 homeless shelter. And the question is, based on the Built for Zero definition, what role does an emergency shelter play in the ending homeless philosophy? Meaning, is that the best use of county dollars focused on an emergency shelter or on more permanent housing solutions? And so I guess they're looking for comment from Built for Zero's lens.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to answer quickly, answer with a short answer, but definitely when thinking about where to spend, a quote that we often use is invest in change and spend on impact. And so this question would be really specific to Oxford County, in that you'd have to take a look at what specific interventions already exist, and then also use that infographic, that amazing infographic that Stephanie put in the chat, to really tell you more about what homelessness really looks like in Oxford. Typically, when we say ending homelessness, we want to shrink the amount of preventative and emergency responses and really strengthen the housing responses that we have. So that's a really general answer. I don't exactly know what intervention fits best for Oxford County, but in general, we want to lessen the amount of Band-Aid solutions, emergency shelters, or invest in how can we strengthen an emergency shelter being a very, very clear stepping stone to permanent housing. And so maybe that's, injecting more intensive case managers or housing focused staff in shelters if you really do have a lack of beds. But you might be able to reduce the amount of folks who are staying in shelters if you're able to provide more housing opportunities. So I would always be wary of, if we're creating more beds, more temporary spaces, are we allowing more folks to be in emergency shelters? where we might be able to see a greater impact in strengthening the avenues that exist for permanent housing. And so like a rapid rehousing type model might make sense, where you look at only really focusing on people who stay in shelter for more than 2 weeks, who do not self-resolve. A lot of people are really resilient. They self-resolve their homelessness. But focusing on those who stay longer in shelter in terms of rapid rehousing programs, what can we do in order to provide them with a permanent space? And so, yeah, it's kind of difficult for me to say specifically where to go for Oxford County, but keeping in mind that the goal is to eventually shrink emergency responses that cost local, provincial, federal governments a ridiculous amount more money than permanent housing does.
Thank you. So, I mean, really the short and simple answer is it's not really an either or, it's a kind of an and both, because there's an immediate need and then there's that longer term vision. And if we can move people into something far more permanent, we won't need to have the same sort of capacity on an emergency level. There's another question. I don't know who wants to jump in to ask, but the question is, what can we as a community do to help? And so as we as community members, if someone wants to take action today to make a difference, what do you suggest?
So I'll jump in.
Please do.
Yeah. Feed them. Help people whatever you can do to support the programs that are already running. Continue to educate those people, to educate community on the myths that you've heard tonight by breaking them. Share the knowledge of what is really going on, and just continue to support the programs that are out there. We have great community programs. Our community really does support itself quite a bit, whether, again, it's a paid professional or a volunteer that's going out handing food out. We have a lot of great things going on. So if you're not sure if you've got some money that you want to support, United Way is a great place to give it, or one of the other, you want to run a food drive, then run a food drive and give it to the food bank, or, grab some granola bars and drop them off. I'll give them out at the bus if you don't want to. Whatever you can do as a community member, there's a way to help. Every little way.
I also want to add to that, when you think back when someone asked, what did we do years ago? We might need to start thinking about that as families and friends. Do you have a space for someone to stay that's struggling right now in your own network? If you're a private landlord in our community and want to help some folks who are really in a situation where you want to be a part of that, please reach out again. There's lots of things that we want to do and can do to support you in housing people in your rental income properties that will benefit you and that person that you're providing a home to.
So I'm going to actually take a moment and sort of officially wrap up the program for the evening. And then if there's a few more questions, we can stay on afterwards. So let me start by thanking our incredible panelists for sharing their wisdom and their experience and knowledge with all of us here in the community. They know what they're doing. They have incredible connections and relationships with people. They're helping them every single day. And they understand the rural context here in Oxford, because that's their world. And so I thank them for sharing that, because we do want to end some of this NIMBYism piece, absolutely. And from a United Way perspective, I also want to thank everyone who's joined us from home this evening to learn more, we had so many people register to say, I just want to better understand. I know it's important and I don't understand enough, and I want to learn more, and I want to learn what I can do and what me and my family can do, or I can do at my workplace. And so I thank you for taking the time. And I think I'll give now a shameless plug. United Way is the largest non-government funder of social services in our community. And we're able to help augment, really, is what we do, some of the amazing programs and services that folks around this table today are talking about, and others. And so whether it's the community health centers, mobile bus, or the transition house, helping to move people into like a stable position where they can move forward on their own and get their own place and their own stable roof over their head. Street outreach, housing stability, food supports. These moving people from poverty to possibility is one of our primary focus areas, and we invest heavily in that. And so I am grateful for the partners who use those dollars so wisely to make the best impact. And as we're ending with a little bit of a call to action, I would ask, if you're looking to make a difference and you want to make a financial contribution, please think of United Way Oxford, because we are 100% local. The money stays here and helps here. I also, on that call to action, I would love all of you to join up, to go to the Social Planning Council website and become a partner and a champion on the End Homelessness Oxford initiative, because again, it takes a village, and we can all be a part of that to help raise awareness and focus to end homelessness and to create better opportunities. Dispel myths, talk to people, share the knowledge, share what you learned today, learn more, ask questions. It's really important. And so I thank you for that. And I thank you for continuing to do that. If we were all around a water cooler, which hopefully we will be back soon. These are great water cooler conversations and kitchen table dinner conversations with kids as well, and then everything else in between. Voice your concerns and your passion for making a difference, and voice that with any and every elected official. They are a part of the conversation. They are not the entire solution, but talk to other organizations that are doing work, and find out how you might be able to get involved, how you might be able to volunteer. But let people know that this is important to you and this is important to the community that you live in, because that can help influence change and opportunity. And there are so many things, and this is the first step. And I'll end on the note that it really does take a village. Everything we do, it takes a village. We're all part of the village. So thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for making this so important as we move forward, because quite literally people's lives, individuals and families, they matter, and this matters to them, and we need to do something to make things better. So thank you for joining us all this evening. I really appreciate it. And we will stick around for another few minutes. And if I can pull a few more questions out of the chat box, we'll do that, and we'll call it quits in another, say, 5 minutes or so. But I know some probably want to get ready to go to bed. So thank you again for joining us. Good night. And so now I will continue to pull a couple of questions. Let me see. Lots of thank yous for being advocates and for sharing and all of that. A question about opportunities for volunteering. And so I think that's something maybe all of us, not so much Lisa with Built for Zero, but certainly Steph and the Community Health Center and United Way and others, to do a better job perhaps of promoting and sharing volunteer opportunities for folks that have something that they would like to contribute back. And where we could point people in that way. And there is a volunteer in oxford.ca site as well. And I would suggest that people can check there. And always remember 211 is a source of information and referral. And they can also connect you to organizations that look for volunteers, as can United Way. We're always happy to have that conversation. I think that is really the bulk of the questions. So on that, we will officially call the night an end. So good night, everyone. Thank you again. And again, thank you, panelists. And we'll say goodbye.